Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. South Park has a knack of calling it. The show's been going for 30-odd years. They don't put out as many episodes these days as in years gone by, but their ability to lampoon society is and remains quite brilliant. It's obviously not everybody's cup of tea. But people who watch it may remember an episode where they came up with a solution to the issues of the food pyramid, which was essentially tipping it upside down. The food pyramid is a total and abject failure. Now, in 1976, there was plans to try and improve the nutrition of Americans. The idea came out of America. It was adopted, not worldwide, but in a number of countries. And the concern was that there were too many people who were overweight and obese and too many with type 2 diabetes. And we have spoken about this previously on the podcast. And therefore, the solution was this new food pyramid. And since its introduction and in conjunction with the low-fat dietary guidelines, we know what's happened to rates of overweight, obesity and type 2 diabetes. And not only have they not gone down, they've gone up 3 or 4-fold. The Health and Human Services Department under Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who again doesn't have to be everybody's cup of tea, and we don't have to agree with everything he says, is actually wanting to tackle the increase in chronic illness in America. And nutrition is a very, very big part of this. Now, the pyramid was replaced in 2011 by the plate, which is basically the same thing in a different shape, but again continues to promote a high carbohydrate-based diet with 50% or more of your calories per day coming from carbohydrates. The body does not need carbohydrates because it can produce enough of its own. Now, it's not wrong to eat some carbs. We have essential amino acids, which are proteins. The body cannot make them. That's why they're essential. There are essential fatty acids. The body cannot make them. That's why they're essential. And vitamins and minerals are also essential. The body can't manufacture its own iron or calcium or potassium or vitamin D. Well, actually, it can convert vitamin D, but it can't manufacture it. Now, in a paper, and we'll put this in the description, the authors of this paper contend that the traditional carb-heavy diet has not only failed to safeguard public health, but may be contributing to rising rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Now, look, because they're researchers and they want to get published, they have to take a bit of a gently approach with their wordings. I get it. They propose a new low-carbohydrate food pyramid designed for the vast majority of American adults showing signs of metabolic dysfunction. Their model is built on protein, full-fat dairy and healthy fat, challenges decades of guidance and reignites a long-simmering debate about dietary fat's role in chronic disease. Dietary fat has been maligned. It is not and never was the problem. And this is revisiting an argument from the 1970s, which was between the supporters of low fat, led by Ancel Keys, and the supporters of low sugar, led by John Yudkin. Now, Keys won the day. It's an interesting story if you want to go down the rabbit hole. And eventually people forgot about Yudkin's book, Pure, White and Deadly, where he argued, and as it turns out quite correctly, that the problem in diets was sugars. Now, I really want to emphasise we're talking about refined carbohydrates here. Not all refined carbohydrate is sweet. If you go to the supermarket, you look at a lot of foods and you look at their carb and sugar amount, it can be quite significant in foods that are not necessarily sweet. Breakfast cereal is probably high on that list. So this paper has looked at the concerns with low-carb diets, which have been demonised. for a variety of reasons, including the influence of the food industry and the agricultural industry, specifically the grain producers and some of the bigger grain producers. And coupled with that, there are also chemical and pharmaceutical companies that go along for the ride. So there's a lot of vested interest in the current model, which sells you food that doesn't provide you with nutrition. So if you're not getting the nutrition you need, you tend to eat more because you're needing the nutrients, but all you end up getting is calories, and we can see over 45 years the results of that. So you buy more food, they can produce more, so they can buy more. The people spend more on chemicals to use on the crops. And then if you do get unwell, well, you enter the medical industrial complex and end up with a whole lot of pills. Now, again, there is a role for treating people with pharmaceuticals. Absolutely that is the case. But do as many people as are currently being treated need all those tablets, and is there a way of preventing rather than treating after the event? And the answer to that is yes, and not for everybody. Nothing works for everybody in all circumstances. There are no force fields, but you can certainly change the odds significantly. Now, the conclusions from this study: the low-carb or ketogenic diet is supported by a large body of clinical trial research demonstrating its safety and efficacy. Efficacy, for those not familiar with jargon, means it works. Commonly held concerns that it increases mortality or the risk of heart disease are not supported by the evidence. They're not supported by the evidence. The original studies that suggested that fats in the diet contributed to heart disease have been shown to be wrong. And in fact, they were borderline fraudulent. But, away we went. There are no harmful side effects of low carbohydrate diet. What else do you really need? What's interesting is that up until the experts in big public health decided to tell us what to eat, we were actually doing fine. People ate foods that they could historically we gathered or we caught. We're talking about foods that till not that long ago were running around or moving somewhere or growing somewhere. We didn't tend to buy a lot of foods, and we're talking about people in, probably before the 1970s or early 80s. We didn't buy nearly as much processed and packaged foods that came in boxes with lots of labels, lots of additives, lots of preservatives, lots of sugar, and you can put on the shelf and eat it in 2 years' time. We didn't. And the argument will be put forward, well, people didn't live as long in those days. Yeah, they didn't, but they weren't. We didn't have the rates of obesity, overweight, type 2 diabetes as we do now, and some of the knock-on effects as well. And notwithstanding that in 1971, then President Nixon declared he wanted to eradicate cancer by 1976 for the bicentennial. Nice idea. Obviously hasn't happened. And in fact, rates are going up and are projected to go up. And nutrition is not the only factor in it, but it is a contributing factor. And I suppose it raises the question as to why big public health and academia continue to cling to the plate or the pyramid, whichever you want to call it, and the low-fat dietary guidelines. And part of it is ego. None of these people will ever admit that they're wrong. And as Jerry Maguire said, show me the money. And I think there is a money trail there. And that's why there is so much opposition to what RFK Jr. is seeking to do. And they'll use everything to try and stop him, including using a whole lot of issues that are not related to food and nutrition as a way to discredit him. Now, nothing is for everybody, and you've got to find what works for your individual body. A bit like different cars may run on different types of fuel and petrol. Different people, depending upon their backgrounds, their genetics, what their likes are, may find that different diets are suitable to them, and there's no one size fits all. In fact, that is probably the fundamental problem, that you can have a diet that suits 8 billion plus people. You can't, you won't, there never has been, there never will be. The whole notion of it is completely wrong. But we can throw out what does not work. And the food pyramid has failed. The plate has failed. The low-fat dietary guidelines has failed. You just got to look around. Who can we learn from? Well, we can learn from our grandparents and great-grandparents and how they ate. We can also look at the Japanese, who have a rate of obesity that's around 3 or 4% compared to the rates in a lot of Western countries. Some of the Mediterranean countries also have lower rates, so we can look at what they do. And it's not just diet in Japan. People are also active. They tend to leave the table 80% full. They get enough rest. They meditate. There's a number of factors. And look, not saying that they don't get things wrong either. Stress levels can be quite high in Japan, and there are issues. Every country has its issues. People have their issues. But if we really want to look at what works in terms of nutrition, then Japan's not a bad place to start. Now, can everybody adopt a fully Japanese diet? No, it's not going to suit everybody. But the principles are there, and those principles includes the components of food and the quantities of food. But of course, we eat more if we're hungry, but we might be hungry because we haven't actually got enough nutrition. So we're eating, as I mentioned before, these foods have got a lot of calories and a lot of sugar, but not a lot of nutrient. And when you're hungry, you don't know whether your body needs iron or potassium or protein or some essential amino acids or vitamin A. You don't know that. You just feel that you need some nutrition. And you keep eating if you don't get it. So we can see the end results, which means that eating foods that are nutritious is going to be better for us. Guess what's the most nutritious? Foods that are least processed. So again, we're talking about meat, fish, chicken, poultry, vegetable protein, if that's your thing. Vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, berries, and drinking mainly water. It isn't complicated. It isn't complicated. Simplify your life. Get back to the basics. Think about what your grandparents or great-grandparents ate. When you go to the supermarket, shop mainly around the perimeter. If you like a sweet treat, you can have it. I've got a sweet tooth as well. It's okay. But it's what you eat more on a day-to-day basis is going to be the key. And there is capacity to change. The person who has the capacity to change is you. And you know what? You can do it. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.